Graham crackers are such versatile sweet crackers, but are they crackers or cookies? Well, they are actually a lightly sweetened, crispy cookie. Eat them as the base for your s'mores with marshmallows and chocolate, or bake them in sugar and butter, turning them into graham cracker bark. This recipe amps up the traditional graham cracker with the addition of holiday spice, making them perfect to eat alone whenever you want with a cup of coffee, hot tea, or hot chocolate. Let's check them out. For the ingredients, you'll need all-purpose flour, stone ground whole wheat flour, dark brown sugar, baking soda, salt, a holiday spice like pumpkin pie, apple pie, gingerbread, mixed, or cinnamon, butter, honey, milk, vanilla, and cane sugar for the topping. Line 2 baking sheets with parchment paper or silicone mats and set them aside. In a large bowl, you're going to add 180 grams, which is 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and 190 grams, 1 1/4 cups of stone ground whole wheat flour. I prefer stone ground whole wheat flour because it's coarser than regular whole wheat, and that is what gives graham crackers their signature coarse texture. If you can find graham flour, use that instead because it's whole wheat flour, just coarser than stone ground and regular whole wheat. Here's a fun fact. Graham, with an additional HA in the spelling, is whole wheat flour versus graham, like the weight measurement spelling, is actually ground chickpea flour, often used in Southeast Asian, African, and Southern European cuisine. Careful not to interchange the two because they are different flours. Chickpea flour does not have gluten, so that's going to make a difference in your baking. Regardless though, for this recipe, you can always just use regular whole wheat flour, although unrefined is best. Then add 176 grams, which is 1 cup of lightly packed dark brown sugar. I like the dark brown sugar in this recipe because the extra molasses enhances the otherwise simple flavor of a traditional graham cracker. Add 4 grams, which is 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 3 grams, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 3 grams or 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. You could also use apple pie spice, gingerbread spice, mixed spice, cinnamon. It's whatever spice you like or have on hand. You can also just leave it out and it makes this recipe more of a traditional graham cracker recipe. Then just whisk or stir the mixture until combined. Add 113 grams, which is 1/2 cup or 1 stick of diced cold butter. You can use salted or unsalted. Then you're just going to cut in the butter using a pastry cutter like this. You could use knives, forks, just whatever you have. You want to do this until the mixture is crumbly. The butter should be in tiny pieces covered in flour mixture. Make a well in the center of your flour mixture. To a small bowl or a measuring cup, we're going to add 112 grams, which is 1/3 cup of honey, and 75 milliliters, which is 1/4 cup plus 1 tablespoon of milk. I'm using full fat here, it's preferred for this recipe, and 12 milliliters or 1 tablespoon of vanilla. And then just stir or whisk until the ingredients are combined. You know you've stirred enough when your milk becomes toffee color and there isn't any honey left at the bottom of your cup. So go ahead and pour the honey mixture in the well of the dry ingredients. And you just want to stir well until everything is dispersed. The mixture will be crumbly. Okay, take a look. The mixture is crumbly, and that's what it's supposed to look like, because we want a crispy cookie, not a moist cookie, right? So it's going to have some dryness in it before we roll it out. But you can tell that most of the flour is moistened, it's just not sticking together. So here's the best way I have found to make this into a dough. When you get to this point, just use your hands and just press the mixture together in the bowl, and it'll start to become a cohesive dough. Look at that, it's starting to come together. When it's almost all together, go ahead and take it out of the bowl and put it on your work surface. Remove any dry pieces left behind. We're simply going to knead this crumble until it becomes a smooth dough. And when I say knead, it's more like just pressing it together. Take a look at that. Now it looks like a regular cookie dough. And we didn't add any more liquid than what was originally in the recipe. To make this dough manageable, we're going to divide it into 3 portions. And they don't have to be perfect, just to make them manageable. And there, of course, that's what the inside looks like. Set the other 2 aside. Now we want to flour our work surface if you haven't already, because we're going to roll out this dough and we don't want it to stick to the surface. Roll out the dough until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Be sure to keep your work surface floured so that the dough doesn't stick. Oftentimes it's recommended that you refrigerate your dough. However, I found refrigerating the dough makes it so hard that you're not able to roll it out and it starts to crack. So I just go right on into the recipe without refrigerating it. By the way, I did move to a different rolling pin because this one produces a more even thickness of the dough. So it really doesn't matter the shape of your dough because you're just going to trim off any of the edges anyway that aren't straight. Set the edge pieces aside. If you've got a square cookie cutter, that would be awesome for this recipe. You need to cut 3 to 3.5 inch squares. You can measure it out. You could freehand it once you get used to what the shape should look like, or find something that's square in your house that's about 3.5 inches and go with that. And then we're just going to mark off 3-inch squares, or 3.5 because it depends on how big you want your cookies. You're looking for that square shape. And this is rustic because you're doing this from scratch. So then, like the traditional graham cracker cookies, you want to take a fork and you want to sort of perforate in half down each so that you can break them in half once they're baked, like so. And you could just eyeball that half. The traditional graham cracker has 11 holes, so I'm sure part of it's aesthetic. The other part is to help the cookies bake more evenly. All right, so you should have 11 holes in each, if I get my counting right. So 4 pairs going down, and then 1 in the center. It's probably the easiest way to gauge that number 11. There you go, that one's right. This one only put 9 in, so, but it doesn't matter. It's your cookie, make it signature to you. Put 9 holes in it, who cares, right? But I'm gonna try to keep them consistent, so I'm gonna go back with 9 holes in this one too. And then we'll do 11 for this one. If we did this right, we should be able to lift the cookies up like that. And then we're just going to place them on a baking sheet, like so. You just want to have a little bit of space in between each for just a small amount of expansion during baking, but they should not expand very much at all. Okay, and that's about how far they should be apart. Once you have a pan filled, take some cane sugar. I prefer coarse cane sugar, and just sprinkle it over the top. You don't have to, but I think this adds a little bit of sparkliness for the season, a little bit of visual appeal. Place your full pans of unbaked cookies in the fridge for at least 30 minutes, but cover it if you're gonna leave it in there for longer than that. You could actually leave this in the fridge for up to 3 days. For quicker baking, you could put this in the freezer for 15 minutes. Then gather up all the scraps of dough and continue rolling out the dough, shaping and cutting it into squares. Follow the same directions for the rest of the dough balls. When ready to bake, or while the first batch of cookies is chilling, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Once chilled, we're gonna bake the cookies for 10 minutes. Then you're gonna rotate the pan like this, and then bake for another 6 to 7 minutes. The cookies should be brown on top and firm to the touch. In the oven they go. Once the cookies have baked, or the crackers rather, you're gonna let them cool for 2 minutes before transferring them to a cooling rack. They should be crispy once cooled. If not, consider baking them a little bit longer, maybe a minute or so. You can tell that my thinner cookies are a little bit browner than maybe some thicker ones, so keep that in consideration if you're trying to decide the timing. Since this is a rustic and home bake, each cookie is going to be a little bit unique. Some might be a little thinner than others, so just keep that in mind as you're baking these cookies. You should end up with about 36 square graham crackers. After a few minutes are up, go ahead and just remove them over to a cooling rack to cool completely. They're already crispy, you can tell. In fact, you can just pick them up by hand. Now that these have cooled, let's check them out a bit. Sometimes they look similar to a commercial graham cracker. You've got the perforations in the middle, which allows you to break them along the perforations. And of course, we have our 11 holes to allow the cookies to bake evenly and to be crispy. They are evenly brown on the tops and the bottoms. And I wanted to compare so you could see I made one that was 3.5 inches square and one that was 3 inches square. You can decide which size you prefer. I think this one's a little bit big, but I guess it depends on what you're going to use it for. So I tend to gravitate towards the 3-inch square. Okay, now let's break into the center. Ah, do you hear that crisp? And that's what it looks like on the inside. To me, it looks like a graham cracker. You've got that grainy kind of coarse texture, crispiness. That's from partially the whole wheat flour and the butter that we cut in like pie crust to make it flaky. So that's where that crispiness and that texture come from. It's time for a taste. Hear that crunch? A couple of things to note on the crisp. If the cookies are a little too thick, they will be a little dense. There's a fine line with the perfect thickness of these cookies. However, making them at home will typically result in a variety of thicknesses. Since we don't have the perfect rolling machine, we can't guarantee that perfectly 8-inch. It might be a little thicker, it might be a little thinner. Regardless, a little thick or a little thin, they are still good and worth making from scratch. The spice hits the spot for the season and makes them perfect to eat by themselves. I crave these and I can't eat just one of these. The dark brown sugar with that extra molasses deepens the sweetness and the flavor. If you want plain graham crackers, eliminate the spice and use light brown sugar. Otherwise, keep the remaining ingredients and directions the same for this recipe if you want one that looks like a traditional graham cracker. Store crackers covered at room temperature for up to a week or even 2. You can leave these at room temperature for a while. These are great make-ahead crackers or cookies. A few days before you want to bake them, make the dough, roll, cut, and shape the cookies into squares. Place the unbaked cookies on a baking sheet covered in the fridge to store for up to 3 days. Then just bake the pan straight from the fridge. When they come out, let them cool and you're ready to eat. This cookie, or cracker rather, has a nice holiday flavor and is light on the sweetness scale compared to a regular cookie. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. Until next time, if you're looking for a lighter, sweet treat during the holiday season, bake a batch of spiced graham crackers and go bake the world.